אני מזמין את האלוף במילואים עמוס גלעד להציג את הדובר הבא ולפתוח את המושב הזה.
יש לנו פה איזה הקדמת לוז, אני רוצה לשתף אתכם מה עומד לקרות בדקות הקרובות. אנחנו ביקשנו ונענינו למרות הקושי שבעניין מהמתאם המדיני של המלחמה בדאעש. ארצות הברית נלחמת בכוח רב נגד דאעש, הארגון הטרור הרצחני, שהייתה לו שאיפה מטורפת להקים חליפות ולהשתלט על מדינות ערב ולערער את כל הסדר הקיים. לקח הרבה זמן, קודם כל יש פה הפתעה גדולה שהם בכלל קמו, התבססו, התחזקו, השתלטו על שטח גדול מבריטניה, ואז ארצות הברית, כמו שעשתה בעבר, פשוט החליטה להילחם בהם ולהקים קואליציה רחבה מאוד. אני זוכר את המפות שהראו לי האמריקאים בימים הראשונים, או בתקופה הראשונה, הכל היה נראה שחור, כמו CT של אדם שלוקה בסרטן, חס וחלילה. היום השחור הזה הצטמצם מאוד, וארצות הברית עומדת בראש קואליציה של 71 מדינות וקצת ארגונים. זה הישג יוצא דופן. כדי לדווח לכם מכלי ראשון, מה התרחש ומתרחש עכשיו, ומה צפוי להתרחש בעתיד, עם כל ההשלכות שכבר אנחנו דנים בהן לגבי איראן, ביקשנו מהמתאם המדיני אסטרטגי של ארצות הברית, שפועל בסמכות ישירה מנשיא ארצות הברית עצמו, שהוא המפקד העליון, והמשרד שלו ממוקם במשרד החוץ האמריקאי, והוא מנהיג את הברית המדינית הזאת לצד המאמץ הצבאי שמונהג על ידי הצבא האמריקאי בפיקוד של מפקד צנטקום. זה מה שאצלנו קוראים פיקוד מרכז, רק בניגוד לפיקוד מרכז שלנו, שטח האחריות שלו זה בערך כל המזרח התיכון ואפגניסטן ופקיסטן והודו, כפי שיאה לגודל העצום של ארצות הברית. ולשמחתנו, המתאם המדיני האסטרטגי, שהוא מאוד מאוד עסוק בימים האלה כמו כל ארצות הברית, הסכים לבוא לכאן במיוחד ולהציג לציבור המאזינים פה ולציבור הנוכחים היכן אנחנו נמצאים בשלב הזה. אז אני אומר לכם, זה דבר מרתק. אבו בכר בגדדי, המנהיג של דאעש, הוא מסתתר, יכול להיות שהוא פצוע, הוא נמלט על נפשו כמו מבוקשים כאלה, והם הולכים ומתכווצים. החדשות הרעות כמובן, זה מה שניתחנו בהרחבה עם שר הביטחון וכו', שהאיראנים מתבססים. ממש לשמחתנו ולשמחתי, השליח המיוחד מר מגורק, דיפלומט רב ניסיון, אדם מאוד מאוד חזק, שמנצח ביד רמה על ברית אדירה של מדינות אירופאיות, מדינות ערביות, נפגש עם ראשי שבטים, שותה קפה עם מנהיגי הכורדים, משוחח עם הטורקים, הסכים לבוא לכאן ולחלוק עמנו את תמונת המצב הנוכחית ואת הצפי לעתיד. Mr. McGurk, I've just praised you about your performance and your unique talents. If you want me, I repeat it privately because I'm taking from your time. And we are privileged and honored to host you here and to listen to you carefully. And we really appreciate that in this era of tension that you are so busy, you have found the time to share with us in Herzliya conference your impression, opinions, predictions, and assessment. Mr. McGurk, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, General Gilad, distinguished colleagues and friends. Thank you for that introduction, and it's a true honor to join you here at the Herzliya conference. It's a particular honor to be here during such a historic week here in Israel. Allow me first to recognize my friend, General Gilad. Amos has always made himself available to discuss the complexities of this most complex region with myself, many of my colleagues, and we've all benefited greatly from your hard-earned wisdom and decades of experience serving your great country. So I just want to say a thank you for your lifelong commitment to your country and protecting your people, and now for bringing together this remarkable group of people every year. My discussion today will focus in three parts. First, I'll provide an update on our campaign to defeat ISIS. And we have made tremendous progress since I was here last year, and I'll discuss what has been done and what we still have left to do. This is also a timely discussion because only 10 days ago, we launched what is likely the final phase of operations to defeat what ISIS used to call its caliphate in Syria and Iraq. Second, with the end of the territorial caliphate in sight, I will touch upon the future of Syria after ISIS, which I know has been a hot topic of conversation here over the last couple days, and what we must do to ensure that these gains we've made are lasting. What does lasting mean? To the United States, it means that ISIS cannot return, but just as importantly, that other extremist groups, whether foreign jihadis linked to al-Qaeda or foreign mercenaries linked to Iran and Hezbollah, cannot take advantage of this new phase. So we'll discuss that. Third, I will discuss in some detail southwest Syria, which was the site of a ceasefire agreement reached between the United States, Jordan, and Russia, and holding in place now for nearly 10 months. And in that context, I'll discuss some of the events over the last 24 hours. So this is unfinished business in the Southwest, and I'll discuss expectations on all parties, particularly Russia, to ensure a lasting and stable peace in this critical area, which protects the borders of our allies and guarantees that threats from any source cannot gather, let alone entrench, in this strategic corner of Syria. So let me begin by reviewing the ISIS campaign, starting from the worst point. And it's useful to remind ourselves what was happening only a few years ago. So the first map, I think, depicts the worst phase of this in the fall of 2014. By the fall of 2014, ISIS really was a quasi-state. It was controlling 7.7 million people, over 100,000 square kilometers, the size of the UK, and it was plotting major terrorist attacks against the West. It had resources unmatched for any terror group in history, about $1 billion a year, and that was growing. More than 40,000 foreign fighters. It's really kind of mind-boggling, but 40,000 foreign fighters, jihadi fighters, many with their families, poured into Syria from over 100 countries all around the world. Inside those territories on the map, which ISIS was controlling, ISIS was, of course, committing mass atrocities and acts of genocide. And we're still today finding mass graves. Particularly up in northern Iraq near Mosul, we found a couple mass graves just over the last month. ISIS was seeking to destroy our common heritage, from ancient sites of Palmyra to Christian homelands in the Nineveh Plains, the Grand Nuri Mosque of Mosul, seeking to destroy all of them, and in the case of the Grand Nuri Mosque, it did so. And they were plotting attacks against us. From Raqqa, its capital in Syria, ISIS was training teams to attack our capitals and our homelands. In Paris, a team of terrorists deployed from Raqqa and killed over 100 people in the streets of Paris in November 2015. In Brussels, a team of terrorists deployed from Raqqa and killed 32 people at the Brussels airport in March of 2016. From Istanbul to Berlin, Nice, San Bernardino, and Garland, Texas, ISIS terrorists in Raqqa were working every day to inspire attacks all around the world. And we honor the victims of all of those terrible atrocities. So in response to this threat, we built a global coalition, and we began what we knew would be a very long campaign to fight back, working by, with, and through local partners on the ground. This really was a different way to fight these wars, working with Iraqis and Syrians to do the fighting, with U.S. forces and coalition forces doing the advising and the assisting. We shift to the second map. When President Trump was inaugurated on January 21st, 2017, less than 50% of the campaign had been completed. This second map depicts where we were at this stage, end of January 2017. The green are areas that had been cleared of ISIS. The orange-red were areas that had not been completed. So President Trump, really on his first day of office, asked us to speed it up. and he ordered a strategic review to be led by Secretary Mattis and to be completed within 30 days. In that strategic review, we identified key decision points for the President, including delegating more authorities to military commanders in the field, providing additional resources to our partners' forces in Syria, finalizing the campaign to seize Raqqa from ISIS, deploying a small team of diplomats to support stabilization efforts behind the lines in Syria, increasing the burden sharing from our coalition partners, and accelerating our regional diplomacy, including what we viewed as a potentially historic breakthrough between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. So decisions were taken, and the results have been decisive. This next slide is where we stand now, and it's what's been done since President Trump came into office. More than 50% of the gains that have been made on the ground against ISIS were made really in the last year and a half, particularly in 2017. The city of Mosul is now fully liberated, coming back to life. Incredibly, more than 800,000 displaced people from Mosul are now back in their homes. United Nations is now accessing nearly all the neighborhoods of Mosul with needs-based humanitarian assistance. Nearly 650 quick impact stabilization projects have been completed or are underway, all being supported by our really historic global coalition of 75 members. I was in Mosul just a few weeks ago, and the west side of the city, where there was really the last phase of the fighting, was just devastated in the final phase of combat. But the east side of the city, quite remarkably, really is coming back to life, and nearly the entire population has now returned. And 500,000 boys and girls are back in school. These are boys and girls that were living under ISIS not too long ago. Next door in Syria, Raqqa is now fully cleared of ISIS, no longer the hub for terrorists plotting around the world. And while a more difficult situation than even Mosul, in Raqqa, over 100,000 Syrian citizens have returned to their homes. As we speak in Raqqa, and I've been to Raqqa twice, as we speak, coalition-supported stabilization programs are restoring water and power service to Raqqa. Coalition-funded demining teams have now cleared about 445 structures. This is ongoing every single day, because what ISIS does before they retreat or before they lose a battle, they just salt the earth with IEDs and landmines so people can't return. So we're working with local Syrians to get a handle on that problem. We're also working with the United Nations to get more international support and NGOs into these areas, which used to be controlled by ISIS. Our global coalition, which I mentioned, 75 members now, five international organizations in 69 countries, is mobilizing its support. In Mosul, coalition partners like UAE are helping to rebuild the historic Grand Nouri Mosque. Germany is supporting initiatives from mine clearing to water to health services. And together, during the Mosul campaign alone, our coalition raised about $2.2 billion to enable the humanitarian response. And that response was quite extraordinary. This is one of the most major, largest combat operations in an urban environment since World War II. We had 1 million citizens displaced during the fighting. And remarkably, I think due to the planning we had done over months before the battle started, every one of those displaced citizens received aid and assistance. Overall, the numbers behind these colors on the map are promising. 7 million people who had been living under ISIS are no longer living under ISIS. 5 million were freed from ISIS over the course of 2017 alone in our accelerated campaign. And Iraqis and Syrians are returning to their homes in these areas. In Iraq, where we have very good statistics from the United Nations, about 3.7 million Iraqis who were displaced are now back in their homes. And that record of returns is historically unprecedented for a conflict of this kind. Most importantly, when you look at that map, ISIS has reclaimed none of the areas it lost through coalition-enabled operations. And this is an important data point. We're quite proud of it, and that we work to maintain. And by contrast, Russian-backed Syrian regime forces have a different record. They have constantly had to go back and re-clear some areas, quite famously Palmyra, areas south of the Euphrates River that they have not been able to hold from areas that they cleared of ISIS. Again, our record as a coalition is quite different, and that's because we apply a different standard, and we focus very much on ensuring a durable result. But this campaign is not finished. Despite the progress, we're not finished. And I want to point to 2 areas on this map, labeled number 1 and 2, where we have recently relaunched operations with our partner forces, known as the Syrian Democratic Forces. This is a force of about 60,000 fighters to liberate the final ISIS strongholds. So let me preview this operation to the extent I can here in this forum. These look like very small areas on the map, these little what's left of the red underneath the 1 and the 2. But they contain really entrenched ISIS strongholds. We think most of the leaders and most of the foreign fighters that are left are holed up in these areas, and they are prepared to fight probably until the death. The number 1 on the map is the Jazeera Desert. This is a traditional extremist stronghold. It's a traditional ISIS, for ISIS, Al-Qaeda in Iraq facilitation route. And similar to how this all started many years ago, ISIS is once again attempting to disperse throughout the Jazeera Desert across the border between Iraq and Syria, bide its time, regenerate, and metastasize. And we're not going to allow them to do that. So 10 days ago, coordinated operations, military operations launched from both sides of the border to entrap ISIS in these remaining havens, from which they will be deliberately and systematically rooted out. And that is ongoing as we speak. The number 2 on the map is down in the middle Euphrates Valley, just north and south of the river. This is also a traditional stronghold. It's not a surprise that these are the last areas on the map that we still have left to clear. And we believe a number of ISIS leaders are holed up in this area. Every day now, and we get reports now every single morning when I get reports of what's happening, ISIS leaders are choosing either to fight to the death or some are trying to escape. But they're not getting very far. In the last few days alone, our forces on the ground, Syrian Democratic Forces, picked up entire families of foreign fighters and other military-aged males who had joined ISIS from foreign countries. In the last 2 weeks alone, based upon multiple sources of information, coalition airstrikes have killed nearly 40 senior ISIS leaders near the town of Hajin, just about where the 2 is on that map. For those still left, it's a lost cause. But make no mistake, this will be a very difficult fight. It'll probably last months. But as we've seen to date, there's no question in the outcome. These military operations have been reinforced really over the last couple years by our diplomacy in the region with a focus of what comes after ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And throughout the campaign, we have focused with equal energy on what comes after ISIS and setting the conditions to ensure this extremist group cannot return. I've already discussed a little bit about how this is being done at the local level through our stabilization programs, but we've been equally focused at the broader strategic level. With respect to Iraq, our diplomacy is focused on opening doors that had been closed, particularly between Baghdad and Riyadh, Ankara, and GCC capitals. And these initiatives, which are spearheaded by the Iraqi government, have delivered results, most notably, as I mentioned earlier, the historic opening between Iraq and Saudi Arabia, including the opening of the Arar border crossing, the reestablishment of flights, commerce, security, cultural, and economic ties between these 2 countries, all of which had been frozen for nearly 3 decades. In March, His Highness the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah, hosted 76 countries, which together pledged $30 billion for Iraq's reconstruction after ISIS. And over $10 billion of those contributions came from the GCC and Turkey, which is really an unprecedented and promising development, which we hope to further advance. So our coalition is now working with the Iraqi security forces and the government of Iraq to combat remaining ISIS remnants. They are trying to return to an insurgent cellular structure, which we're determined to ensure that the Iraqi security forces can stay ahead of that. And very importantly, for Iraqi security forces, legitimate Iraqi security forces, to have full control over its sovereign borders. And those efforts will be ongoing. Syria, of course, is more difficult. We're not working with the government in Syria, and we will not work with the Assad regime, nor will we support reconstruction in areas absent a serious, credible political process that fully implements the principles of UN Security Council Resolution 2254. And that's a principle that was just reaffirmed by the European Union and our like-minded partners. So let me focus the second part of my discussion on Syria after ISIS. I know this has been a broad topic of conversation here over the last couple days. And as I already mentioned, our partner force, the Syrian Democratic Forces, relaunched operations in eastern Syria to liberate the final ISIS strongholds just a couple weeks ago. The fighting will be difficult. There's no question they'll prevail. But again, this will take some period of months. We're also looking beyond ISIS, and here I'd like to emphasize some key principles stated by President Trump and from the State Department just over the last few weeks. First, we're fully committed to completing the fight against ISIS and rooting out its remaining havens. Second, the United States will remain on the ground in Syria until ISIS is defeated and the so-called caliphate is completely eliminated. Third, we will work to ensure that local forces enabled by our regional partners and allies and our coalition, can consolidate these gains, stabilize liberated territories, and prevent the return of ISIS. Fourth, we'll continue to work with Syria's neighbors, Turkey, Israel, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon, to secure their borders from ISIS and other threats. Fifth, we will work to ensure that ISIS cannot return and that the Assad regime or Iranian supporters and the networks that Iran supports cannot exploit the populations liberated from ISIS. Finally, we will protect our forces and those of our partners, as we have demonstrated over the past year. If anyone on the ground in Syria wishes to threaten U.S. forces or our partners, the response will be decisive and devastating. In parallel, as we work to advance the political process to end the underlying civil war, the United States is committed to ensuring that all Syrians, including the Arabs, Kurds, Christians, Turkmen, and other minorities in northeast Syria, where the fight against ISIS has been most intense, have a full seat at the table and an appropriate say in the future of Syria, consistent with UN Security Council resolutions. Let me focus on one of these principles, but I know has been a focus here again over the last few days, and that is the desire of the Iranian regime to exploit the current situation in Syria for its own hegemonic ambitions. It is in the interest of all parties to the conflict of Syria, I include here in particular Russia, to ensure that Iran cannot succeed, because the risk of its doing so is a far broader and even more complex conflict. So here's the basic issue, of which everyone in this room is very well familiar. As the civil war in Syria has begun to wind down, Iran has begun to pursue its own objectives on Syrian soil. It is seeking to entrench military positions, together with sophisticated weapons that have nothing to do with fighting terrorists and everything to do with projecting power outside of Syria's borders, including a direct threat to Israel, as well as to U.S. interests and American citizens in the region. These activities have not gone unnoticed, and they will not go unanswered. Russia has repeatedly and consistently claimed to support the principles of Syrian sovereignty and the territorial integrity of the Syrian state. Those are principles we, the United States, share. They were even enshrined in a statement between President Trump and President Putin. In Da Nang last year, both presidents affirmed in a joint statement their, quote, commitment to Syria's sovereignty, unity, independence, territorial integrity, and non-sectarian character, as defined in UN Security Council Resolution 2254. And we remain fully committed to those principles. And what does that mean? In our view, a sovereign Syria means all foreign fighters, including Lebanese Hezbollah or Iranian-backed fighters from as far away as Pakistan and Afghanistan, should leave Syria. It means Iran must not pursue its own hegemonic agenda to reach outside the borders of Syria from Syrian soil. And so for Moscow, we really ask a basic question. Is it the sovereign decision of Damascus to allow Iran and its proxies to use Syrian soil as a launching pad for attacks outside of Syria, particularly against Israel? If so, does Russia agree with that decision? Does it have any influence to reverse it? And if not, then isn't the biggest violator of Syrian sovereignty, which Russia claims its presence is in Syria is meant to uphold, isn't the biggest violator of Syrian sovereignty your erstwhile partners from Tehran? So the question is really, what are they going to do about it? And again, a simple question, and questions we call on Moscow to answer and to act upon. In the meantime, and make no mistake, Israel has every right to protect its borders, to include freedom of action, to take measures in self-defense. And this is an absolutely bedrock principle for the United States. It's one that is unwavering, and that will never change. And I think this was actually clearly demonstrated just last night. Iranian Quds forces launched 20 rockets at IDF positions on the Golan Heights. A number of these rockets were intercepted by the Iron Dome anti-missile system. Others fell well short of their target and actually landed inside Syria. There were no injuries from this attack, but it was provocative, reckless, totally unacceptable, and called for a response. And in response, Israeli Defense Forces rightly struck dozens of Iranian military targets inside Syria. I just returned before coming here from meetings at your Ministry of Defense. The Israeli Defense Forces, the strikes last night were precise, proportional, highly effective. And of course, they have our full endorsement, and we commend the teams from the IDF that carried them out. At bottom, and again, this talk is timely, because as we saw just in the last 24 hours, Iran's presence and activities in Syria have nothing to do with protecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. And again, that is a stated basis on which Russia's presence in Syria exists. In fact, Iran's presence risks a wider conflict that would mire Syria in ongoing turmoil for months and years to come. So we call on Russia to act, to use its influence to rein in these activities in furtherance of its own stated intent, as expressed at the highest levels, to support Syria's sovereignty and independence, and where it is unwilling or unable to do so, we recognize and fully support Israel's inherent right of self-defense and freedom of action to protect its borders and its people, as was demonstrated last night. So all of these issues come to a head in southwest Syria. In southwest Syria, ISIS is present, an affiliate known as Jaish Khalid bin Walid. This little ISIS affiliate controls territory on the borders of Israel and Jordan. Foreign jihadi fighters are present, some affiliated with al-Qaeda-linked extremist groups, but in very small numbers, much smaller than similar networks that exist in northwest Syria. And Iranian-backed militias are present, seeking to carve out their own safe havens, primarily in areas controlled, obviously, by the Syrian regime. Over the first 6 months of 2017, the United States, Jordan, and Russia negotiated a comprehensive ceasefire in the southwest. This was a protracted negotiation. I think this is a map of the southwest zone, just so you have a sense of, I think you all know the topography, but this is the area that I'm talking about. But this is a protracted negotiation, US, Russia, Jordan, with expert teams detailing a line of contact across southwest Syria and through Daraa City. And that line of contact is the bright red line that you can see. That was really negotiated meter by meter over a course of months. President Trump and President Putin finalized the ceasefire at the G20 summit in Hamburg on July 7th. And since then, it is largely held. And that's a significant achievement in itself, because about a year ago at this time, the southwest corner was on the verge of a major conflict, and Daraa City was at risk. Since then, the fighting between the opposition and the Syrian regime has largely stopped. Hundreds of families have returned to their homes, and thousands of lives have likely been saved. And we're determined to keep this ceasefire in place. Russia, which has deployed its own monitors to regime areas, tells us it shares this objective, and this is the only ceasefire that was endorsed by the United States and Russia. So it's a test. It's really a threshold test on the extent to which we might be able to work with Russia on other issues related to Syria. But the ceasefire and stopping the fighting is not the entire agreement. Russia, the United States, and Jordan agreed to remove all foreign fighters from the southwest zone. In Jordan and the United States, we have taken measures south of the ceasefire line, and the Russians have taken some, but not enough, on the north side of the line. The objective is a southwest at peace, secure, and not a threat to anyone, whether to the Syrian people who have suffered long enough, or Jordan to the south, or Israel to the west, with no foreign proxies anywhere near this zone. If Iran believes it can use this corner of Syria to establish expeditionary facilities, it's badly mistaken. As I mentioned, Israel has every right to act against such threats, and Russia has an obligation to ensure it never reaches that point. So our objective here remains a diplomatic resolution to these very serious and very complex issues, but the jury is still out on whether that is possible over the long term. We hope it is, but we'll see. So in conclusion, I'll sum up with 3 points. First, our ISIS campaign has accelerated over the last 18 months, as you've seen. The end of the territorial caliphate, what it used to call its caliphate, is now in sight, really for the first time. And we will not stop until that mission is complete, and will continue to enable the Iraqi forces on the Iraqi side of the border and local forces in Syria to root out clandestine ISIS networks even after the caliphate is defeated. Second, as part of this comprehensive campaign, We are equally focused on ensuring that any vacuums after ISIS cannot be filled by other extremist groups, including foreign militias backed by Iran. And we call on Russia in particular to support these efforts, which will be essential to any lasting settlement in Syria. Finally, our bedrock commitment to the security of Israel is unwavering, and we fully support Israel's inherent right to self-defense in protecting its people and its borders, including, for example, the highly effective and successful action that was taken just last night. So again, Amos, I ran a little bit beyond my time, but I want to thank you for inviting me, and I hope to come back again next year, hopefully with some good news. But it was an honor to address all of you, and I've been following this conference as I've been traveling on Twitter, and it's really, truly an extraordinary event, and I look forward to listening to the upcoming panels. Thank you so much.